Plato's Republic is one of the most foundational works in all of Western philosophy, and not just because it's a particularly early example. The Republic is Plato's most profound statement about what it is to be human, about what it is to be a member of a society, and what societies ought to look like. Central to this are a series of 3 little stories that I'd like to take us through. Call it Spelunking through Plato as we're talking philosophy. The thing about Plato, whether you agree with him or not, is he taught us just about all we know about how to do philosophy. One of the features you'll see in philosophical writing by Plato is always a dialogue. They say he was a frustrated playwright. But again, I think dialogue is so important in philosophy because you want to show the interplay of ideas. Sometimes maybe 2 just opposing one another. There might be a third where you get some kind of Hegelian synthesis going on, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Lots of things go on. Or maybe you just want to present several points of view. But in his dialogues, there's always stories. The Republic is a series of stories about the question of what is justice. Just a couple of stories off the top of my head. We get the story of Gyges and his ring. We get the story of the noble lie and the foundation of a society. We get the story of how that society grows and how it shapes into the world where it's clear that only the experts need to be doing what the experts do best. And as a result, he sets up an educational system. And as part of this educational system is the discovery of the well-ordered soul, the 3-part well-ordered soul. Each of these things come out of stories that he tells, examples that he looks at in Greek history, in Greek mythology, or stories of his own. What we're going to talk about in the next few little meetings we have is a series of stories central to the Republic. These stories are, if you will, the surface level of how we get to the deep caverns, the deep caves of Platonic philosophy. But before we go down, I want to talk just a moment about some choice words used to describe these stories by philosophy instructors and philosophy students over the years. You'll hear these things called myths. You will hear them called fables. You will hear them called lies. You will hear them called parables. What they are metaphors. They're all elaborate figures of speech trying to explain indirectly something that Plato at least thinks that he cannot explain directly, or perhaps not so much that he can't explain directly, but that the direct explanation is not as rewarding, does not illuminate as well as the indirect method would. There's a danger here. Metaphor is not reality. There's always a question here of, can we keep the metaphor distinct and separate from the reality? That's very tricky, keeping them separate. I proposed that elsewhere that reality is about an interaction. We're describing an interaction that we're suggesting a metaphor for. So we don't want to confuse this idealized interaction of the metaphor with the actual interaction of reality. Well, let me give you an example of why this is dangerous. I want to turn now to a brief passage from Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light. This is from Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. A thing happens once that has never happened before. Seeing it, a man looks upon reality. He cannot tell others what he has seen. Others wish to know, however, so they question him, saying, "What is it like, this thing you've seen?" Like this thing you've seen. So he tries to tell them. Perhaps he's seen the very first fire in the world. He tells them it's red, like a poppy, but through it dances other colors. It has no form, like water, flowing everywhere. It's warm, like the sun of summer, only warmer. It exists for a time upon a piece of wood, and then the wood is gone as though it were eaten, leaving behind that which is black and can be sifted like sand. When the wood is gone, it too is gone. Therefore, the hearers must think reality is like a poppy, like water, like the sun, like that which eats and excretes. They think it is like to anything that they are told it is like by the man who has known it. But they have not looked upon fire. They cannot really know it. They can only know of it. Now, Zelazny's trying to introduce us to the concept of naming, and he's going to go on in the next paragraph to talk about how naming still doesn't capture a thing. But that's the point. Naming is a metaphor. It's something we call something rather than what it is. When we listen to what Plato has to say to us, we're listening to his metaphors. He's not telling us what is, he's telling us what it is like. The sun, in the coming paragraphs, doesn't make our minds anything. It is something else that does. But the same way the sun makes vision possible, so too does this other thing make knowledge possible, make awareness of the truth possible. So, bearing in mind that metaphor is not reality, that all we're trying to do is offer a comparison, let's take a look at the myth of the sun. Plato has brought us through the construction of this society, brought us through to the realization that the well-ordered soul is governed by reason, that the most rational of persons is a philosopher, and therefore the philosopher is the just and right king of our city. He has to explain truth. The philosopher is the one who knows the truth. But what is this truth? The myth of the sun is going to tell us about how truth is illuminated, how we come to discover the truth. And then this idea will be developed on into how truth plays a role in knowledge, and then we'll arrive at the great discovery that we find underground in the cave. Okay, the sun. Plato suggests that of the senses, sight is unique. He says it's only sight that needs something extra in order to work. All right, let's run over. He's saying here, touch. Touch, all I need is something to touch in my fingers, and that's touching. Smell, all I need is something to smell, and it comes to my nose. That's smelling. Taste, all I have to do is put something in my mouth. Tasting takes place. Hearing, all there has to be is a noise, and I hear it. But with vision, I need to add light. And light comes from the sun. Now, before we go forward, let's just talk here briefly about how wrong Plato is. he's just naive. He just doesn't have the background to know that he's wrong, but he's wrong. The obvious ones, I think, are sound, hearing. There has to be a medium, something to carry sound waves through. Likewise with smell. There has to be air. No air, no smells. Yeah, okay, touching and tasting, I'll give him those. But smell and sound need air, gas, a medium to travel through in order for them to work for us. But, okay, put that aside for a second. But it's just a reminder. It's just a reminder that no metaphor is perfect. A perfect metaphor wouldn't be a metaphor. It would be a description. Okay? So he's offering this metaphor. The metaphor of the sun. He says, just as sight, in order to truly see, needs the sun, so does truth need some illuminating force, some illuminating principle. Truth makes us, people, enlightened. The discovery of the truth enlightens us. The pun's there in the Greek. We are enlightened by the sun, and we are enlightened by the sun. The sun, he says, is a metaphor for, a stand-in for that principle, that most perfect of principles, which illuminates everything. He says, look, we know that this is a true table, a true chair, a true human being, a just human being, a good human being, because we can compare them to an ideal, a perfection. And we can rate things as to how good they are, how true they are, comparing them to that perfect, that most perfect vision of them. But there has to be some explanation for why those perfect visions are perfect. Why are they good? And this is what gets called the form of the good, the perfection of perfection. It is the ideal of ideals, that which makes the ideal ideal. You understand what I'm saying here? That it's imagine, if you will, perfect red. Okay, that's perfect red. We all agree. We look at it on a chart and we go, yep, that's perfect red. That's exactly the red I mean when I mean red. Well, why is that? Why is that perfect? What makes something perfect? Well, perfect is perfection. In order to have perfection, there must be an idea of the perfection. If we don't accept the idea of perfection, then we don't need an idea of the perfect. Well, Plato was all about perfection. Again, Plato's perfection is not metaphor. Plato's perfection is reality. That imperfection from that ideal, insofar as you are less perfect than that, but that much less are you real or true or right. And he says the sun is that form of the good in this metaphor. That when we describe things illuminated by the sun so that we can see them, we're describing how perfection emanates from this form of the good, making the things perfect, that our life we live, the life we see, the life we have to deal with, how they imitate the perfect examples, but require the perfect of perfection, the idea of the good, the form of the good, to make their perfection possible. So illumination, enlightenment, relies upon this stepping through to the form of the good, the sun. Again, the sun is a metaphor. The sun is not actually the form of the good. The form of the good is not a material thing. The sun is a material thing. But let's just say it exists in a higher reality. Plato would like me saying that. Now, Plato's reasoning here points to perfectionism. But let's just take a moment here. Plato's whole point is that the concept of perfect is necessary for perfection to exist. The form of the good is perfect good. Everything else is then a perfect sample of what it is. But our reality, our lives, our experiences are always short of perfection. Our ability to only approximate the truth points to the whole issue of the metaphor, the problem of the metaphor. Metaphor is always short of the truth. Has to be. Otherwise it would just be a description. And a metaphor is not a description. It's a comparison. It's an analogy. It's what we call in a philosophy class inductive reasoning, reasoning based on probability. Just how close is the analogy? I want to propose at least two criticisms here. One is that Plato's analogy is poor. I mean, it's really quite poor knowing what we know about physics. Even if we step back to what he's trying to get at, I mean, he says the sun is a source of life. The sun is not a source of life. I mean, it's a way living things come to be, but it isn't where life comes from. It's where reproduction comes from. It's where, for plants anyway, it's where nutrition comes from for plants, and therefore by extension those of us who eat plants, but it is not life. So again, the analogy falls short. It does not give life to perfection or imitations of perfection, unlike the form of the good. The whole goal, though, of perfection just seems out of order to me. I don't, a minute ago I mentioned red. I mean, I don't have to know what perfect red is to know whether or not one object or another is red. You know, I don't have to approximate it to some ideal red. I can compare them to one another. I can look at something that's green and something that's purple and say, well, the purple is more like red than the green is, without ever once having to compare to some master red in the world of the forms, the heavens above, some ideal color chart, if you will. So Plato's requirement here seems to me not only unnecessary, but the foundations of a philosophical point of view, a psychological point of view, of perfectionism that has been very evil to human beings in general all along. We've gone as far toward the cave as we can on this trip. Next time, before we go down into the ground, we'll take a look at the divided line. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the program. Hey, subscribe if you didn't. I need the subscribers. If you did enjoy the program, though, ring the notification bell, and that way you'll be notified when the next episode is available. If you have any comments, please make them below. I will respond to any questions you may have as quickly as I can. If you have comments, I'll try to make sure I acknowledge those. Maybe somebody else can answer your question. Maybe they have a similar question. This is intended not as a lecture to be memorized, but rather a conversation provoker, a way to get people talking to each other about some of the problems that shape our world. And in the spirit of talking to each other, If you like anything you hear on my channel, please share it with a friend. I think that what we need in this world is more people talking philosophy.